Greetings, everyone. Richard Solomon and Antonio Saillant. It is a combination of Rocket Green Radio and Taking Care of Business. This week's special guest hails from Grenada. Wow. So we're expanding the globe. We have Dr. Hugh Sealy. Welcome to our show. You have a great resume. You're a chemist, bioengineer. You got all kinds of cool degrees. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I'm a chemical engineer by profession. The definition of a chemical engineer is a jack of all trades, a master of none. My master's and my PhD are in environmental science, and my research interests are climate change and sustainable development, in particular in the context of small island developing states.
So you're in a small island. So what do you do day to day?
I'm a professor in the Department of Public Health and Preventive Medicine at St. George's University. We teach students, we give them a master's in public health, primarily U.S. students.
Now, wow. How long have you been doing this very important
Well, I've been there since 2008. Before then, I was the Energy and Sustainable Development Advisors to the governments of Grenada, Barbados, St. Lucia, and Dominica. I have been a climate change negotiator on the behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, which is a grouping of 39 small islands in the Caribbean, in the Pacific Ocean, and in the Indian Ocean, and I've been doing that since 2007. I've attended every major climate change conference since 2007, including Copenhagen in 2009, Paris, of course, in 2015, and Morocco last year.
Let's talk about that, because that's really fascinating, and most people don't really know. How do these conferences work? Who organizes them? How long do they last? And what's supposed to happen during these conferences?
Well, if you go all the way back to the Earth Conference in Rio, in Brazil, in 1992, there were three major conventions that were signed at that conference, and one of them is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So way back then, the world recognized that climate change was occurring, and that this surpassed national boundaries, and that we needed a global governance structure to deal with this global phenomenon. So we passed that convention in 1992, and since then there's been a conference of the parties to the convention meeting annually. And then we had the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, and that set targets for greenhouse gas emissions from the industrialized developed countries. And then since then, in Paris in 2015, we had the Paris Agreement, which is now a legally binding international treaty that to all extent replaces the Kyoto Protocol and asks all countries, both developed and developing, to make contributions towards mitigating climate change.
Now, what are the challenges that smaller islands that are not that industrial, that rely more on tourism, have to face, and what is their strength in these negotiations?
Well, I'll take the last part first. Our strength is our numbers. Under this convention is one country, one vote, and that's usual under the United Nations. So the 39 countries that we represent out of a total of 195 countries is a sizable block when it's one country, one vote. The importance of this to us is that this is not purely an economic issue. This is an existential issue for a number of small islands. If climate change goes on the way it is currently occurring, temperature rises, sea level rises, acidification of the oceans, extreme weather events, a number of small islands will fail to be viable human settlements by the end of this century. Quite frankly. So for us, our backs are against the wall, and this is whether we will continue to exist or not.
So that's pretty scary. So has there been any surrounding islands that already has changed over the years?
In the Pacific Islands, in the Pacific Ocean, you have a number of islands that are very small atolls that have already been lost. There's already climate change migration occurring from these small islands. Here in the Caribbean, we have already experienced at almost 1 degree Celsius of warming. Sea levels are rising at around 3.2 millimeters per year already. We are already locked into at least 1 meter sea level rise. Some people say 2 meters of sea level rise by the end of this century.
Wow.
Now, in terms of sea level, what would a 2 meter rise do to?
It would be absolutely devastating to the island that I'm living on, Grenada. We would lose the vast majority of our coastal infrastructure, and that includes high amenity tourism resorts, your airport, your seaports, of course, your hospitals, your electricity generating stations. All of that is projected to be lost by the end of this century.
And when you think about it, time goes very quickly. So it's not that far into the future when you really think about it. So going back to these negotiations, who sets the agenda and how long of a period of time do these conferences take place?
The agenda is set by the parties themselves, and we meet twice a year. In the middle of the year, the subsidiary bodies of the convention meet, and then at the end of the year, there's an annual conference. This year, both of those meetings will occur in Bonn, in Germany, which hosts the headquarters and the secretariat of the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. What we've been doing since Paris is been trying to put the nuts and bolts onto the Paris Agreement. So we had this historic agreement in Paris in 2015. Now we have to put all the details in place to make sure that everyone knows what we're supposed to be doing. Not only in terms of the nationally determined contributions, which is the mitigation targets that we've set, how much we're going to reduce. Each country is going to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. But also absolutely critical for developing countries and small islands in particular is the issue of finance. And the developed countries have promised at a minimum of $100 billion per year that will be transferred from developed to developing countries. And this is supposed to be over and above initial development assistance. And so that carrot has been dangled in front of us. We now have the Green Climate Fund, which is a major financial instrument that's been set up, headquartered in South Korea. But we're waiting to see the money, because without that money, we will not be able to transform our energy sectors, nor will we be able to adapt to the impacts of climate change that are now inevitable.
Wow, yeah. So explain, has the weather been changing? Because I read somewhere, I think in your bio, there's been a lot of category cyclones that have been hitting the past islands for the last 10 years or something. Has that changed any? Has there been more? And do you really think has climate change a big issue?
Yes, climate change is already occurring. This is something that we're seeing directly in front of us. We're seeing more extreme weather events, more Category 4 and Category 5 hurricanes, longer dry spells, longer drought periods. Of course, the ocean acidification and the sea level rise are highly problematic for our coral reefs. So our coral reefs are now highly vulnerable both to the warmer temperatures, which cause coral bleaching, but also the acidification, the lowering of the pH, which then virtually dissolves the carbonate shells of the coral. And then the coral provides a mechanical barrier to wave action on the beaches and of course provide the white sand to the beaches. So if you have more extreme weather events and storm surges and sea level rise on top of diminishing coral reefs, then you have a triple whammy occurring on your coast. So it's one problem piling up on another that climate change is causing. And please accept the context that you're dealing with climate change in a developing country where eradication of poverty is supposed to be your immediate priority, not building resilience to a problem that you did not cause.
Yeah,
but I guess
it's funny you say that because the whole Mexican and building of the wall thing. I wrote to a friend of mine who deals with solar energy. He's an expert in that, and I said to him, I wish they came in a different tactic, different direction, and would have said something like, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're a scientist, so you kind of look at it in a different way. And just by me mentioning something like this, people have said it seems like it would be a good idea. And it came upon, like, if they took it in a way, instead of building a wall, they build solar panels, huge ones, like a solar wall, that went from left all the way miles across and would help both developing countries. Well, you know, it would help the United States, but it will also power Mexico. But here's the thing. They have drones that circle around the areas that are powered by the solar wall. You know, and if anybody would try to jump the wall, it would pick up instantaneously and alert the patrol people. So in a way, you're not selling building a wall to keep people out. In a sense, you're building a wall, a solar wall, that would help Mexico and the United States contribute into the environment. But what you're really doing is you're keeping people out, but in a positive way.
Well, I think that there's something called thin layer technology in solar that's but they haven't broken through yet. But hopefully we will be able to paint surfaces and turn them into solar cells. I would love it where every rooftop, every wall on a building, every road surface becomes a solar panel. I absolutely believe that the technology is there now that allows us to the term that we use is decarbonize or economies, which basically means we've got to stop burning fossil fuels.
I know. They just did a whole thing in the college, in Grenada College, where the students, 5 students locked themselves in the president's office because here's the thing, here's the discussion here. They have $100 million of funding that these students do not want that money to go to fossil fuel, you know, and that was their fight, you know. So now the president is now writing a proposal against that, supporting the students, and now it's over to the Board of Trustees. So, and then Leonardo DiCaprio saw the little video and actually tweeted it. He retweeted it all over the place because he feels the same way. You know, get rid of fossil fuel. I mean, we're talking about $100 million of funding, you know, and the students, you know, they have every right. It's their future. It's, you know, the next generation. And you know what? It hit home. And I'm walking around, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I tweeted it all over the place, and I believe Leonardo DiCaprio saw it, and all of a sudden now it's national news. So now,
well, I think you've hit on one area that I think, if I'm optimistic, I think has significant potential to move us towards effective mitigation of climate change, and that's divestment of funds away from fossil fuel companies. I think that if that trend can continue, then yes. But don't get me wrong. This is not that simple. The International Energy Agency has stated in a fairly recent report that 2/3 of all the oil, coal, and natural gas proven reserves must stay underground and cannot be brought to the surface and combusted if we hope to keep global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. And we're already at 1 degree Celsius. And the small islands have asked for a limit of 1.5 degrees Celsius, not 2, because we consider 2 degrees C of warming even too much. But the fundamental point I'm trying to make is that there are trillions of dollars of assets already on the books of companies and of states of proven reserves that fundamentally cannot be brought to the surface, and therefore there will be stranded assets. So we have to find a way to not only decarbonize our economies, but how to write off trillions of dollars of assets out of a global economy without causing the world's economies to crash. This is not a simple problem.
No. Let me go back to one thing that you said that's really important for people who are listening to get in context. What is it about every degree of warming what is it about each degree, and why is 2 degrees a benchmark concern? What is it about?
It's not a benchmark. We thought it was a safety rail, but it's not. It's not a safety rail. It's a precipice. and that we can't go over. At some point, we're gonna reach a stage with the warming where it will not be possible to stop the train, and it will cause runaway climate change. Now that 1 to 2 meters of sea level rise that I'm talking about, that is with expansion of the oceans and limited melting of the polar ice caps. However, if we go above 2 degrees Celsius, then it is quite likely that we're going to lose Greenland and the West Antarctica ice sheets. And if we do lose those, then we're talking several meters of sea level rise. And that's catastrophic. That's just not only small islands that you're losing. You're losing the eastern seaboard of the U.S. You're losing the western seaboard of Europe. We would now be in a very, very catastrophic situation. So that's why we're talking about 2 degrees as a threshold. But quite frankly, we'd be much more comfortable with 1.5. And don't forget, we're at 1 degree of warming right now.
Now
and we're already seeing the impact.
Where did we measure the 1 degree from? Did they pick a year as a consensus?
No, if you look at NASA, your own scientific organization, NASA, and they have different baselines. The 0.99 degrees of Celsius of warming that has occurred in 2016. That is on a baseline from around 1951 to 1980. So we're not even going back to pre-industrial levels. We've only gone back slightly into the 20th century and taken a mean from there. If we go back to 1880, then temperatures have already risen by 1.1 degree Celsius.
So
that's a global mean average. If you go in the north to Finland, for example, temperatures there have risen by more than 4 degrees Celsius already.
Has the rise in temperatures peaked in certain parts of the world but not others?
That's the point I'm making.
Right. So what would explain that? What would explain that? Is it like an ozone depletion or something like that? Or
no. It's that if you imagine the world with the cold poles and the warmer equator, and then you dump a lot more heat into the world, or the world absorbs a lot more heat. The change in temperature is going to be more drastic in the colder areas than the warmer areas. The cold areas are going to see a greater change in temperature, and that's exactly what's happening. So you're seeing in the north, in the Arctic, and in the south, in the Antarctic, greater changes in delta T, in overall changes in temperature. But you're seeing it at the equator as well. But not as accentuated.
All right, this is Richard Solomon and Antonio Saillant, and we are talking to Dr. Hugh Sealy from Grenada. And we'll be right back right after this. Keep it locked in on Taking Care of Business at Rocket Green Radio. All right, greetings from Grenada. Welcome back, Richard Solomon, Antonio Saillant, and Dr. Hugh Sealy. Now, of course, we're doing this by telephone because we don't have the budget to go to Grenada. But if we could, we would have been in a studio somewhere on that great island, and we would have done this all in person.
It's about 25, 26 degrees right now and it's nighttime, and during the day it's going to go up to 29, 30 degrees. I'm not sure where you are in the world right now, but I suspect you're a little bit colder than we are.
Well, we can only dream that when we have you come back, we'll do it in a studio near you. Okay, so one of the things they were talking in pre-production was what can people do on an individual basis in their day-to-day activities in terms of their purchases. Obviously, conserving energy, using, I guess, solar energy in their homes. What can be done on a residential basis, on an office basis, on a school basis? I mean, we were talking before about putting solar panels on all kinds of things. I'm surprised that rooftops in New York City don't have either water collection devices, solar panels, or agricultural components.
Richard, don't get me started on that. I could go off on that with the Board of Education. I could continue.
It's a very good question, and it's one that my students ask me when we're teaching them this the masters in public health, and the vast majority of students at St. George's University are American students. It's an American-owned university. And so they're asking, do I have to stop driving my SUV? Can I still have my plasma TV? Can I still have my iPhone? And my answer, and some people don't agree with me, but my answer is yes. That with the right technologies in place, and if we green our grids, and if our electricity sectors start generating electricity from renewable energy, and then we bring our transport sectors onto the grid by electric vehicles, then we've gone a vast way towards reducing our emissions without changing necessarily our lifestyles. If you do want to do immediate things to change your lifestyles, and we're living in a fossil fuel economy, well then travel less, ride a bicycle if more than driving a car, buy local, so go and commute locally, use the telephone as we're using here now, rather than flying off and having a physical meeting. Even the way that you eat, eating less meat is going to reduce your carbon footprint as well. And
it'll also
agitate politically. And I just want to put in this last one, because I'm absolutely convinced that if people care about climate change, the politicians will start caring about climate change, and they will pass the right policies that will get us out of this crisis that we're in.
Well, one of the interviews that I did not that long ago was with a gentleman named Dr. Michael Greger, who wrote a phenomenal book called How Not to Die. And, he said basically, eat more plants and eat less, if not no meat at all. And even though that was great for the environment and climate change, it also had the side benefit of reducing disease and improving health and longevity. So I wonder if some of this can be promoted in a selfish way, which is, hey, not only is this good for the climate, but it's good for you, and because people do care about their health and their well-being and longevity and aging and all that other stuff.
Absolutely, but I do not want to remove the pressure that we need to put on the fossil fuel industries, and that we need to stop burning oil and coal in particular. And natural gas is less carbon intensive, and perhaps it can be used as a transition fuel. But we've got to leave that coal in the ground.
So what
not only in the U.S. I'm talking about India and China in particular.
What are the fuels of the future?
Version countries. Those are the ones that are going to determine our fate.
What are the fuels of the future, other than solar?
Well, some would argue nuclear. If we can get our act together, we can make it more safe, and we can deal with the spent fuels in a more efficient way. I know that there's a lot of interesting research going on into the future nuclear technologies. But besides that, I'm absolutely certain that renewable energy, wind and solar, are already competitive with oil and coal, and there are other emerging ocean technologies. Ocean thermal energy conversion is one. Geothermal, of course, is a proven technology. Hydro, of course, is a proven technology as well. So I am absolutely convinced that these technologies will be able to displace oil and coal and natural gas in the future.
I know you were saying, and I may have cut you off, so I'm sorry. You talk about coal. So which are the countries that are the most dependent on coal and use the most coal right now? You said China and India?
The ones that I'm concerned about are India and China. In particular, why? Because you combine those populations and you're talking about 1/3 of the world's peoples. India has over 200 million people that are energy poor, that don't have access to modern energy services, and it's their government's absolute right to develop and to bring those people out of poverty. But how do we provide them with modern energy services? Is it going to be coal, or is it going to be solar PV? That's the absolutely important question. Now, for China, China has already recognized the limitations of coal, and China's been using coal at a huge rate, building massive 1,000 megawatt coal-fired power plants every month. But what has happened to the air quality has been disastrous. And so from a public health standpoint, China has recognized that it's got to switch away from coal. And therefore, China has been installing more renewable energy capacity than any other country in the world, by far. So I would hope that a lot of us would copy what China is doing. Germany, of course, has gone through a revolution and has shown how a northern country with very little sunlight compared to us in the tropics can green their grids.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because Apple, the company that does the iPhones and all the computer, they have a solar farm in China that controls and powers a lot of their facilities, and they believe in being sustainable. They also have acres of land where they grow their own trees instead of going and chopping down trees. They grow their own trees and chop down their own trees and regrow them and chop them down and regrow them.
Sustainable forestry, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that for their paper needs?
Even here in our region, I would say that Brazil is a fairly good example of a diversified energy mix with nuclear, hydro, biofuels. Of course, the use of ethanol as a flexi fuel was pioneered in Brazil.
Wow.
Now,
did they get that from the sugarcane? Because we use corn.
Yes, they get it from sugarcane, which is much more efficient than getting from corn. The energy you put into the corn is the same amount of energy you get out in the fuel. Whereas with sugarcane, you get 7 times more energy out than you put in.
Well, not only that, but also isn't there the danger that a lot of the corn that they're growing is genetically modified, and that has other repercussions to the environment?
Well, it has other repercussions besides the GMO part of it. The corn is food. It's direct. It's a staple. And so if you start growing food for fuel, that has impacts on commodity prices and downstream impacts on economies that we didn't contemplate.
These are heavy topics. So when you bring all this into the classroom, how does this work? Because it's so complicated, and the problems are diverse.
Oh, it's absolutely motivating because I'm teaching people who are going to become doctors primarily, people who are going to put on that white coat and stethoscope and become symbols of authority in their countries, and that to me is inspiring because if I can get them to become climate change advocates, then that's the way that we're going to change the world. And I absolutely think that the medical profession, because this is a public health issue, climate change is the greatest public health threat that we face. And therefore, the medical people, our surgeons general, they have to become involved as well.
Somebody told me, maybe it doesn't matter. Somebody told me that because it's getting warmer, because we don't have the kind of winters that are as cold as they used to be, the viruses that circulate don't get wiped out as fast, or don't get wiped out as much, and as a result, virus cycles are sort of uninterrupted, and that is bad also for us because when it was colder, it acted as a deterrent, or at least a check against viral growth. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or you know anything about that.
The way I would respond to that is that climate change is having health impacts that some of them are direct, like heat strokes, direct impacts like extreme weather events, floods, hurricanes, etc. Yes, but it's also changing the migration patterns and breeding patterns of vectors like the Aedes aegypti, mosquito, which of course here in the tropics is of a lot of concern to us because that's a carrier of dengue, of chikungunya, and now this new one, Zika. And you should be, of course, concerned in the U.S. because the mosquitoes now coming north as temperatures and climates warm. So yes, we are absolutely concerned about that. Changes in hydrological cycle as well. If you have less water available, then you have sanitation issues that you have to deal with as well, and that's also going to be a public health issue. There are also links to increases incidences of asthma. So there are a number of health impacts that climate change is already causing. The Center for Disease Control, the CDC, in the U.S. has pointed out about 10 areas where they think that much more research is needed into the impacts of climate change on health.
I think one of the things that we see here is the mosquitoes, and one of the things that New York City is doing, unfortunately, is they have these very, very broad spectrum spray programs. And they're not, in my opinion, this is my opinion, I don't think they're using environmentally safe sprays. I think they're using something called Anvil. They use these trade names. But I've actually complained a lot because when you think about it, I have an organic garden in my backyard. And what do? They in the middle of the night, sometime between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., they have spraying. They just announce it. They don't even, and this again is an opinion, but they don't really tell people enough. And I've complained to all the local people who are in charge of these things and are in the information loop. And I'm like, look, if you're going to spray, I don't agree with the spraying, but if you're going to spray, can you at least give us some notice so I could bring the tomato plants and some of the things in the garage and cover them up, and then cover up the garden a little bit with a tarp, so that that the fresh local organic vegetables that I'm growing to be sustainable are not being poisoned. And but so the thing is, it's like each problem creates another problem. So if the climate is changing, and if the mosquitoes are advancing, and there's more viruses, and then there's more spraying, it just keeps. Then there's more spraying, there's more water pollution, and there's more cancer. Then it just seems like the problems are just spiraling and escalating.
I would agree with that. I think here in the Caribbean, we also have spraying programs in Barbados and in Grenada. I know that we use malathion as the active ingredient, and that's a general pesticide. That would then have residual impacts on water bodies and of course your pollinators, your bees, etc. So I agree, but it's a balance. We've got to kill the vector, or else we're going to have epidemics of dengue and other diseases that are driven by these vectors.
Right, and those are really nasty diseases.
Yeah, they can kill.
Yeah. So the problem is, so who are the people who are actually making the decisions on all of this on a science level, and where are the think tanks of the world where this information is being analyzed and looked at and discussed?
Well, there's something called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and this panel consists of a couple of hundred of scientists representing all of the governments of the world. And this panel doesn't do the science itself. It reviews all of the relevant scientific articles, and it publishes a summary every 6 or 7 years. So the fifth assessment report, which is the latest one, came out in 2013 and 2014, and that report is the latest science that all of us basically trust.
But where are the think tanks that they draw upon? So if that's the body,
they're all over the world. NASA, of course, the U.S. has been a leader in climate change science. Of course, you have people like James Hansen at NASA. You have NOAA, your National Oceanographic Administration. That's also a leader. You have the Potsdam Institute in Germany. That's a world leader as well. Here in the Caribbean, we've been doing some research at the University of the West Indies. I have every single major campus in the world is doing research on climate change, from Australia to the impacts on the barrier reef, to India with their energy research institutes, all over the world.
Can I ask you a question? How much of that research do they take in consideration the universe, space, when it comes to climate change? The sun.
Well, the sun, of course, is the primary radiative force. So the impacts of sunspots, any change in the Earth's angle towards the sun, any change in the Earth's orbit, all of that is put into the climate model.
Okay, good, because Stephen Hawking said one time that when the universe was first created, the Earth is still actually being created. It's still evolving, and he said that there's going to be changes accordingly to all the way the planets work out, alignment, and so on. He says that it changes the weather, but that we also contribute to climate change. It's human factor too. So in your study, you took all that thing. Do they do a study on both and come out with some kind of resolution? Is that what it is?
Right before
absolutely.
Hold that thought. We have to, and absolutely, okay. But we have to take a hard break here because that's the radio rules. This is Richard Solomon, Antonio Saillant, and Dr. Hugh Sealy, who's got an answer for Antonio's question, which we will review right after this. All right, welcome back. So, Antonio, before the break with our guest, Dr. Hugh Sealy from Grenada, there was a question pending, but we had to take a break. So would you reintroduce the question so our good friend, the doctor, can give his brilliant answer?
Yeah, Stephen Hawkins has always, also myself, I always wanted to know if the calculation that you do for climate change, does it take the factor that, the world is changing, it's expanding because the universe obviously continues to change. And I just want to know if that has any factor on the changes of the Earth and your calculations when you're dealing with the human factor.
My response to that is yes, absolutely. I think I said before we took the break. The climate models take that into account, and it is recognized that over geological time we've had significant changes in surface temperatures, both for the land and the oceans. We've had ice ages, and then we've had interglacial periods. So we are in an interglacial period now. What the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, what that group of experts has said unequivocally now is that the rate of warming that we're seeing now, we have never ever seen in the last 800,000 years of climate data that we've been able to gather from ice cores, and satellite data, et cetera. So it is now absolutely clear that one, climate change is occurring outside of what is normally a normal geological occurrence, and that two, mankind is causing this climate change. Those two facts are now unequivocal.
So I have a related question. How many people are on the Earth now? And at what point is the tipping point that we cannot sustain the population? That, like, in other words, you were saying how maybe a 2 degree difference, we would have a 2 meter rise in the water level. At what point do we have a Earth population that exceeds the planet's ability to sustain that?
Well, let's look at it from a climate change standpoint alone. So we're looking at the Earth's carrying capacity as far as people go. We're not looking at being able to feed them or house them, etc. But we're looking at their carbon footprint, and we've got 7 billion people on the Earth right now, and our carbon footprint is somewhere around 10 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. On a per capita basis, and the average American is emitting around, a bit more than 20 tons of carbon dioxide per year. A poor person in India is probably emitting less than 2. On a global basis, for us to be sustainable and keep that warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius, we all have to be at less than, say, 5 tons of carbon per person per year. If you want to do it on a per capita basis, which I think is perhaps the most equitable way to look at it, and how as every single individual of the 7 billion of us need to reduce our own footprint. Now, the world's population is projected to increase by 2050. Some of the estimates say up to 15 billion, but the most conservative estimate says that we will peak at around 9 billion people. So that's the population side of it. But our carbon emissions is not only our population; it's our affluence. It's how big our economies are, and we're living in a global GDP of around, and I'm rounding off numbers, somewhere around $70 trillion US dollars is our global GDP, but that will double by 2050. So it's not only population that drives things; it's technology. So our populations will stabilize, but each one of us, our carbon footprint will increase unless we do something about it.
Well, especially because we're using more and more electronics, more and more devices. Just think of this because I deal with a lot of construction and construction litigation, things like that. When you look at an old apartment or an old home, in the wall there was like maybe one outlet over here and one outlet over there, and they had the 2-prong outlet, and there's only one above the other. Now you need power sticks because you have your VCR, you have your cell phone, you have your answering machine, you got your TV, you have a lamp, you have some kind of external drive, you may have a fax or some other kind of device or a scanner or whatever. We didn't have these levels of devices all those years ago. Years and years ago, you had a phone, it didn't have an answering machine, and if you weren't home, there wasn't even a place to leave a message, And
yeah, but the good thing is we've become a hell of a lot more efficient in our resource use. I mean, what the exciting thing about the U.S. is that if you look at data coming out of the U.S. in the last couple of years, post the recession in 2008, because there was an artificial drop in U.S. emissions because manufacturing went down and the whole economies went down after the recession. If you look at 2014, 2015, I haven't seen 2016 data yet, there's a phenomenon occurring, what we call decoupling, where you are getting an increase in your GDP, but you're not seeing a commensurate increase in emissions. That's good news.
What do you attribute that to?
That's better efficiency. That's better energy efficiency.
But where is that efficiency coming from? At the power plant level, at the user level, every level, better cars?
Every level, at the power plant level, at the car level, because and I know you don't want to speak about politics, but someone called Obama introduced fuel efficiency limits for cars, and that's big.
Well, California was always pushing that before anybody else. In fact, I think California led the country in emissions standards.
Absolutely.
Well, Governor Schwarzenegger was high when it came to in the environment. He was big on it.
But that's the message I would like to get across is that the U.S. is showing to some extent, because you can't argue that a lot of the manufacturing is also pushed overseas, so that the iPhone is designed in California but manufactured in China. So who's responsible for the footprint? Okay, let's take that argument and set that aside for a while. There is still a phenomenon occurring in the U.S. where you do have a growth in the economy without a growth in carbon emissions.
But I also heard Apple is now, they're going to be doing renovations on a lot of their stores in the United States, where they're going to be replacing the tiles on the floor with solar tiles. So I read that. I read that article not too long ago. I'm talking about maybe 2.5 weeks ago, and my hair stood up because I said to myself, "It's about time."
Now, what do solar tiles on the floor do? How does that work?
The same way. And you know how? Did you ever go to an Apple store?
Yeah.
It's transparent. It's made out of glass, so
right.
The sun goes directly right on it. And in all the facilities are designed on an open sky, meaning you can see the sky. It's like blue.
Like a skylight.
In every facility, right? So it's perfect, and how they design it's just beautiful. When I read the article, I was just blown away because I'm speculating New York City because you know how I am with New York, and I'm very disappointed. They're moving very slowly, but yet they have the money for it and the budget for it. They keep announcing how all the the New York schools, the high schools, Board of Education are going to be doing solar energy on all. But it's taking such a long time, and I really don't understand why it's taking. They have the money for it. They just need to do it. But it was very interesting to read that, and I got excited because, I'm a supporter of solar. And, Apple, to me, it's huge when it comes to being sustainable. So
Doctor,
anyway,
where are
the price of solar is coming down. There was a big solar farm that was just awarded in the Middle East of all places, and I think it was an Abu Dhabi firm that won the bid, and they started to bring numbers in, but they won the bid at 6 cents per kilowatt hour. That's low. The price of electricity here in Grenada with diesel combustion is close to 40 US cents per kilowatt hour, and you have a solar plant coming in at 6 cents per kilowatt hour. This stuff is becoming highly competitive. The other phenomenon that's occurring is this issue of distributed generation. The fact that any householder now can put a solar PV panel on their roof and become their own generator. We're calling it here in Grenada the democratization of electricity generation. So there's a social impact that's occurring. The electric utility company, though, the company that's responsible for centralized generation, is seeing a threat to its business model, and that's happening across the world as well. We're on the cusp of a revolution in electricity generation.
A friend of mine who lives in Long Island put solar all over his house, and he actually puts electricity into the grid, and he gets like a refund.
Exactly. Like, imagine if all of us did that, then the utility company would have to change its business model.
Well, then they just charge for the distribution. Yeah.
Yes, they would just be responsible for the grid.
Well, look, what's interesting is my friend's electric bills are either he gets a refund or they're incredibly low.
And then imagine him with an electric vehicle in his garage that has a huge battery in it.
Exactly, so he wouldn't have to fill up every week. One thing I can tell you is that I've not really noticed a big improvement in miles per gallon in cars over the years. I've driven all kinds of cars for a long period of time, and it seems like, for the most part, we haven't seen in the last 30 years a big leap in what, it's always been in the 20s, 20 miles, 20, 27 miles per gallon.
What do you expect if you have vertically integrated companies and the fossil fuel companies are significant shareholders in the automotive industry? What do you expect?
Right.
That's absolutely true.
Because the thing is, you'd think that in 30 years, at least we'd be getting 50, 60 miles to the gallon, but we don't.
No, we engineers, we invented the internal combustion engine. I think Ford did it, and we haven't gone along much since then. I absolutely agree with you. Not only the internal combustion engine in cars, but also our thermodynamic efficiencies in our electricity generation. We're still down to 30-40% of efficiency. We're losing a hell of a lot of energy.
Do you see electric cars becoming commonplace?
Absolutely.
Commonplace,
Absolutely.
as opposed to a fad or just trend setting?
No, go to the Netherlands. Go to the Netherlands and see. I think for the first time last year, electric vehicles were almost outnumbering the sale of conventional vehicles. Well, I went over to Barbados just last week, and there's a company there selling electric vehicles and putting charging stations around the island. Electric vehicles are here to stay.
Well, I know
and they will capture more of the market as consumers recognize that this is the way that we can go.
I know that Israel.
I ask people. What are we going to do with the batteries?
That was a question I wanted to ask too.
From the cars. What are we going to do with all those batteries?
I think that's a fair question. That we have to get better battery technology. We are getting better battery technology. We're no longer talking about the lead acid batteries. As you know, Tesla is doing a hell of a lot of research in this area, and whoever comes up with the best storage devices, I think is going to capture the global market, not only for transport, but for the household as well.
Well, I know that Israel has a whole plan right now for electric vehicles, and where you instead of recharging your vehicle, you pull into like a station and then you swap your battery for one that's already charged.
Yeah.
And they're planning on doing that like around the country. Now, I guess
and that speeds up your charging time as well, because you're not sitting there waiting to be charged. But generally, if we put our minds to it, and we put our political will there, I think that's one area that the U.S. has always been strong in. That innovation will come, and I'm absolutely convinced that the world will be a bright place. We will all be able to achieve the quality of life that we want, and still have a planet that's sustainable.
Wow. So if somebody comes to your country and says, I want to do this film, this movie, done by a huge director, huge actors, and all of a sudden they come to you with a plan and says, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this explosion scene here, and we're going to have 2,223 gallons of kerosene and 72 pounds of powder explosives, and this is all going to create a huge blast. And they're going to use about 150,000 pounds of TNT. What would you say to that?
I am not an expert in what the impacts of in terms of global emissions are of the pyrotechnics that are done in the film industry. If you consider it a significant issue, then I'm sure that technology also can be brought to bear. That you don't have to use up all that kerosene, etc., to have that visual effect that the director is looking for.
Right. But let me ask you a question. What is, in your experience, during combustion, kerosene? What happens when kerosene is released? What happens? Like
kerosene is a hydrocarbon. So it's relatively volatile. It's gonna break down. It's going to evaporate eventually and go into the atmosphere. Now, if it breaks down into methane, the smallest hydrocarbon, methane has a global warming potential of around 23 compared to carbon dioxide as 1. What I'm trying to get at is it's better to burn the kerosene than to let it evaporate. If you let it evaporate, it causes more problems than if you just combust it and turn it into CO2. That's because of the methane. So one of the biggest things that we can do to mitigate climate change, for example, is to flare all the natural gas that's escaping from oil wells around the world.
I can't thank you enough for bringing wisdom, scholarship, intellect, science, and authenticity to the airwaves. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. I'm not sure that I brought all that into myself. There's a huge cadre of scientists out there who are doing the work. I'm just acting as a mouthpiece for some of them. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience. As I said at the beginning, I'm a negotiator for a constituency of small islands that are the most vulnerable to climate change in the world. We didn't cause climate change, but we're the ones that are feeling the impact. And unless the rest of the world changes the way it does things, then we will cease to exist. So that message has to get out there.
Dr. Sealy, do you have an email or any kind of address if people want to get in touch with you or send comments?
I can be reached at hsealy@sgu.edu, hsealy@sgu.edu.
And if not, you can always send us an email. We'll make sure we forward it because we have all the contact information. That was an incredibly powerful hour of radio. Thank you, Antonio, as always, being just a tremendous producer and a person who finds incredible guests. Thank you, Doc. That's it for us. We'll see you in a week.